Thank you again for being here. Secondly, we have a great speaker that I'm going to try to introduce in just a minute, but I do want to bring to your attention some resource tables that are in the back. They are representative of the community coalitions in each of the jurisdictions in the New River Valley, as well as NRVCS as a whole agency. Mike, is there anything you'd like to add to the resource tables, any information?
Just for those of you who aren't aware, the little black bags on the NRVCS table are the Deterra medication disposal bags. Those are for prescription medications. It's a carbon-based product. You take your unused, expired medications, add it to this bag, add a little bit of water, shake it up, it dissolves the medication, and it's environmentally friendly. So it's a nice, convenient, easy way to dispose of your prescription medication. So we've got tons of those available. If you want some for your congregation, my card's on the table, just let me know. We'll get those to you. Great.
Thank you, Mike. So our speaker today is someone that I just met this morning, Michelle Mathis from the foothills of North Carolina, I understand. Mike came back from a panel discussion that he had been a part of fairly recently in the New River Health District, and said, we need to get this person for our clergy summit. So it was very difficult to do so. Shot her an email, bam, sure. So Michelle, thank you very much. Michelle's going to bring to us some information about harm reduction strategies and her particular ministry, Olive Branch. I'm sure it's not just you, but others as well, Olive Branch Ministry. So welcome, Michelle. Thank you.
Good morning. It's still morning for a little bit, right? This is a great group. I often get to speak to clergy groups, and they're maybe a quarter of this size, so I'm very encouraged. Thank you so much for having me. I didn't drive up from North Carolina this morning. I drove over from Lynchburg. My daughter is working on her master's there, and so any excuse to come to Virginia, I always end up in Lynchburg. Just to be able to see her for a few minutes, and I'm happy to come back across the state to be here today. Olive Branch Ministry is a faith-based harm reduction ministry, and we're going to talk about what exactly that means. I want to know, first of all, before we get into what harm reduction is, how many of y'all are familiar with that term? So just a very few people. So, and I like to be interactive. What does that say to you, that term, harm reduction? What do you think it means? Harm reduction. Mitigation. Minimize the harm, right? Okay.
Helping prevent harm.
Helping prevent harm, right. And so that is very true. And we will talk about the specifics of harm reduction. I want to give you a little background on what Olive Branch does. Olive Branch was founded 10 years ago. We became an official 501c3 5 years ago because it took us 5 years to raise the money to be able to file our nonprofit paperwork. But I'm the co-founder and the executive director, and I founded it with Karen Lowe. Both of us had experience previously in doing HIV education and outreach, and we decided to form Olive Branch as a way to meet people where they are, not just people who use drugs, not just people who are HIV positive. We also work with the homeless population and other individuals who are kind of pushed to the edges of society, and we felt a real need for that. We decided to branch out 3 years ago from our home church, which had a faith-based, abstinence-based recovery program, housing program. Wonderful church. I served there as an associate pastor for a number of years. Before I became associate pastor, I was the health and wellness minister there. But when I sat on Sunday morning in my robe and my collar and I looked out into the congregation, I realized the people that I was truly called to serve would not feel welcome there. And it wasn't because the church was not welcoming, because the church was welcoming. Our senior pastor had 25 plus years of heroin addiction before he became abstinent and now actually serves as the chaplain in the prison where he was incarcerated. So he has plenty of life experience and was able to reach people on all different levels. However, the congregation and the sermons were constantly talking about recovery in the traditional sense of the word, abstinence-based recovery. But I know that there's a lot of people that I was dealing with on a daily basis in the work that I was doing, mainly in the evenings because I still had a regular full-time job working in a hospital. I used to say my 8 to 5 paid for my 5 to 8. And so I would spend 5-6 hours in the evening and then all day Saturdays and Sunday afternoons in the street with folks that I knew wouldn't feel comfortable walking through the door. So I made the decision to hang my robe and my collar up, trade it in for some Converse, which I'm not wearing today because I tried to dress up for y'all. But usually I'm in Converse and jeans and a ball cap, and I hit the street. And that very first Sunday that I was there, I was riding around and I had my praise and worship music going in my car, and I was so excited to be on Sunday morning out in the street meeting my folks. And one guy said to me when I called him and I said, "Do you need to meet today?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "But aren't you supposed to be in church?" And I said, "Well, I've decided I'm going to do something different. We're going to see how this works." And after we had a chance to meet, he said, "We have had church, and thank you for being here." And that was just confirmation to me. Some people are called to serve in the tabernacle, and some are called to serve in the tents. And I'm a tent person, quite literally, because we go into the tent cities and the homeless communities and serve as well. So that's where Olive Branch kind of got started, kind of where we are today. We also do, in addition to traditional harm reduction services, which includes naloxone distribution, syringe exchange, peer support services, referrals to agencies that do more traditional types of recovery treatment. We also do jail-based education. So in Cleveland County in North Carolina, we go into the jails, we go into the men and women's detention centers every week, and we talk about everything from tolerance drop to drug use to wellness recovery action plans, teaching people how to survive on the inside, knowing what their triggers are, and then how does that translate when they get outside of the gated community? What does that look like? And then working with their families to help them get ready for when the person comes home or may get transitioned to a different facility. And then we also, in Gaston County, run the overdose response team, where we do direct response. When someone overdoses and they're reversed in the field by EMS and brought to the hospital, we meet them at the hospital at time of crisis. And we sit and we say, "What do you need? What are your goals?" We don't say, "This is what you need. Can I take you to detox? What are your goals?" And if they say, "We want to go to detox," okay, well, let's make that happen. I want to go to rehab. Okay, well, let's make that happen. I want to be safer in what I'm doing, but I'm not ready to make that change to stop yet. Well, let's help you with that until you get to that point. That's what Olive Branch does. And we're faith-based. So what does that look like? How do we separate our theology from our work, or do we? We say faith is why we do what we do, but it's not what we do. Because the majority of the folks that we encounter are not yet ready for that step. They're not ready yet to hear. And so if we're able to build a relationship with them, even after 2 or 3 conversations, typically they say, "Why do you do what you do?" And we're able to say, "Because someone once met us where we were, and we're meeting you where you are. And that individual made a positive change in our life, and we want to help you to be able to do the same." Sometimes the conversation ends there, but oftentimes it goes into further, and we begin to talk about faith and spirituality. But that's not the initial conversation. So that's a little bit about what Olive Branch is. So now I'm going to get back. We're going to talk about harm reduction. I'm going to give you some basic harm reduction 101. And then we're going to talk about how do communities of faith plug into harm reduction if that's something that you're wanting to do. We realize that harm reduction is not the answer for everyone. That for some folks, what I've already said to you is probably making you a little nauseous and maybe a little cringe. But for some of you, you may be excited and want to hear more. So just bear with me through this, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation at the end. So how many took motor vehicle to get here today? Okay, everybody did, pretty much. So let's look at our little buddy over here. We use harm reduction every day when we're in a car. Every day. We use the seatbelt, right? Not because we want to have a wreck, but in case we have a wreck. In case somebody hits us, we use the seatbelt. Hopefully we have airbags. If you have a newer car, you have an airbag. Some of my cars do. Some of mine are really old and they don't. But we do that. We obey traffic laws. We don't text and drive. We're not supposed to. Those are all harm reduction principles. They reduce harm for very high-risk behavior. Motor vehicle deaths rank number 4 in the nation. It's the 4th leading killer. It's a high-risk activity that we participate in willingly on a daily basis, but we put harm reduction measures in place to mitigate, somebody said that earlier, to mitigate that risk, to reduce that risk of us getting injured. Harm reduction, very simple. We have an end game that we're trying to achieve by taking a motor vehicle. For some of us, a lot of us, is to go to work. Why? So we can get a check. Why? So we can have a roof over our head, food in our belly, school supplies for our kids or grandkids. Harm reduction lessens this high-risk behavior. And then here we have a little one on a training wheels on a little bike. My youngest granddaughter just turned 4, and she has her first bike. And you better believe she has the helmet and the elbow pads and the knee pads and the training wheels. And if I could wrap her in bubble wrap and she could still move those little legs, I'd wrap her in bubble wrap. I want her to be safe. I want her to be secure, but I want her to learn how to ride a bike because I think that's an important skill and an important part of childhood. But we also know that every year in the United States, 350,000 children under the age of 15 are rushed to the hospital emergency room with injuries from bicycle wrecks. This is a high-risk behavior for kids, but we still want our kids to participate in it, so we take actions to reduce the potential harm. Cute little kid. Nice harm reduction going on. We don't want people to get hurt. This child does not want to get hurt, but there's still activities that they want to participate in. All right. So let's talk about, is that the next one? So there's not one before that? All right, so we'll talk about this. What is harm reduction? Harm reduction is reducing harm associated with high-risk behaviors to improve the quality of life. It involves many programs, policies, and practices. It celebrates the values of incremental gains, and it's about dignity, compassion, and hope. It looks different for each individual. It's a philosophy. It's not a hard set of rules. So what works for me is not going to work for you. What works for you is not going to work for you. What works for you is not going to work for you. Why? Well, we just learned in that ACEs exercise that we all have different traumas, right? We have different things that affect us. Some experiences are positive, and they help us build our resiliency, and some things are negative. So when we go and we try to apply a same standard set of rules and practices across the board for individuals, it's not necessarily going to work for everybody because everybody doesn't respond the same way. So that's what harm reduction is. That's okay, go ahead. Harm reduction is not about anything goes. So we don't say just do whatever you want to willy-nilly and we're good with it. What we say is it's not our place to say whether this is good or bad because it's your journey and we honor your humanity. But what we are going to do is educate you, we're going to edify you, we're going to build you up, and then we're going to empower you to use the new self-confidence you've found, the new relationships you've built, the tools that we've educated you about. We're going to empower you to use those to make positive changes in your life. It's not don't ask, don't tell. I don't let folks come into our offices or meet them on the street without having a conversation. We don't blindly go into working with individuals. Now, when we first meet them, obviously we don't know what's going on, but we do ask. We do assessments. We collect data. We check in with folks. We want to know, how's your mama and them, right? How's that job search going? How's your usage going? Have you had any breakdowns this week? So it's not a don't ask, don't tell. It's about relationship building. Now, I left this in here because people always say, well, you're enabling. Harm reduction does not enable as a philosophy. But I'm going to tell you I am an enabler. I enable people to say disease-free. I enable people to build a relationship with someone that they can trust, who does not judge them, who is willing to be there no matter what, whether they're abstinent or whether they reinitiate use. I enable them to find faith in a society that has sometimes and most times abandoned them. I also enable them to have an easy way to get connected with God, if that's something that they choose. Whereas I said folks did not feel welcome to come to our church. It wasn't the church that made it unwelcome. It was their current relationship or a past relationship with their higher power that made them feel uncomfortable and ashamed. So we remove that isolation and we enable them to meet God where they are. So yes, I'm an enabler. I wear that proudly. Harm reduction is not a hook to get people into treatment. Our overdose response team has an 83% success rate in connecting people to care. It's one of the highest in the states of North Carolina. But not everybody wants to go into some sort of clinical care or treatment. And we recognize that. But we don't say we're not going to work with you anymore. We say keep coming back. Keep coming back. We're going to keep working with you. Because you never know when that next conversation you're going to get a yes. Or you're going to get a, I've thought about doing this, what do you think? Harm reduction is not a direct path to abstinence. I have friends that have used drugs for a really long period of time, used substances, so we include alcohol with that. And the only thing that works for them is 12-step. Whether it's Celebrate Recovery, AA, NA, any of those, I think there's like 128 12-step groups now. And that works for some people, and that's wonderful, and we celebrate that. But we also know for some folks that doesn't work. It takes them a first or a second or a 15th or a 20th time before they're willing or able to be able to go. And then we're not anti-abstinence. We have local meetings posted in every one of our offices. We're getting ready to add local meetings to our website. We had it on our old site. We've just redone it. So if you look, you won't see that, but by next week it will be up. We're always making referrals to clinical abstinence-based treatment facilities. In fact, my two offices that I have right now are both located in recovery centers. One is at Phoenix Counseling, and so we have day treatment here. And then there's a hallway, and on that hallway at the end is a set of locked doors. On the other side of that door is detox. Guess where my office is? It's the last door before you get to detox. Why? Because when people come out of detox, we're the first office they hit. And they come in to get Narcan or naloxone from us. Not because we think they're going to relapse or reinitiate use, but because we want them to be safe. Because we never know what the next minute holds or what the next stressor is going to be. Or they may have a family member that needs it. So we're not anti-abstinence. I'm part of the National Mobilized Recovery movement right now. If any of y'all have read the book American Fix by Ryan Hampton, it's a great read. You should read it. It talks about a lot of the problems that are going on currently with the recovery community in the United States, and about how harm reduction, which is an evidence-based program, is part of the recovery continuum. And so we're merging those fields together. A long time they've been separate. But we're very much pro-abstinence for those individuals who are looking for that. All right? So now let's talk about opioids. Everybody heard of opioids, right? That's why you're here? All right. So let's talk about this. And I'm not sure, I missed the very first speaker, so I'm not sure how much of this we went over. I'll go very briefly. We have common prescription opioids, oxycodone, hydrocodone, and a lot of other stuff over here. Fentanyl is commonly prescribed opioid. Usually it's prescribed for use in the emergency room. Sometimes fentanyl is prescribed as a pain patch for chronic pain patients. We have codeine. We have morphine. We've heard of all of these. And those are things that some of you may even have in your medicine cabinet. Then we have the illegal opioids, heroin, fentanyl, any pain medication that an individual takes that is not prescribed today. So if you're a mom and your 16-year-old has an abscessed wisdom tooth and you can't get to the dentist until Monday, but you have some Percocets in your medicine cabinet from where you threw your back out last year, and you give your child one of those pain pills because you don't want to see them in pain, you've just committed drug diversion. It's illegal. But we see that happen all the time. You call your neighbor, hey, do you have? I'm in pain. We see it happen a lot. But it's illegal. We don't often think about that. And then opioids used to treat other opioid addictions. We know this as medication-assisted treatment, or the word that we use is medication-assisted recovery. So methadone, buprenorphine, Subutex, Suboxone, those are also opioids. Some folks feel that you're just trading one drug for the other. But I can tell you, if I had a child who has substance use disorder, and they had an option to buy one of these on the street, or to have something that's regulated until they get to the period of abstinence, I'm going to want them to take something that's regulated. It takes a while for folks to go through medication-assisted recovery. Some folks are on it for a really long time, years. Some folks are on it a short period of time, period of months. Everybody's normal is different and everybody's journey is different. But if we're talking about the difference between life and death and reducing harm, the column in the middle is the most harmful. This is the least harmful if we're comparing the two. I'd rather somebody take the least harmful option, even though it's not perfect, if it keeps them alive long enough to be able to get a job, regain custody of their kids, maintain stable housing, work on their marriage, and find an abstinence path to recovery. Let's talk about fentanyl for just a minute. I mentioned it in the previous slide. Fentanyl is an extremely strong opioid. It's really bad. And I know that it's in Virginia because I've talked with the harm reduction folks that are here in the state. It's really all over the United States, and it's not just what you hear about in the news. Used to be, even 2 years ago, we've mainly heard about fentanyl being in heroin, street drug. But now we know that fentanyl is being served up on the street in pure form of fentanyl. We also know that it's in crystal meth. We know that it's in cocaine. It's being used to cut a lot of different street products. Now, why does that matter? Because fentanyl is an opioid. So you may have someone who's been using crystal meth, and they're not smoking it, they're injecting it because they get a quicker high. And they don't realize that there's fentanyl in it. So they're used to getting one reaction, and instead they have an opioid overdose reaction. We have people that are dying who have not overdosed before because they're not aware that there's fentanyl in their drugs. Now, are we saying drug use is good? No. Are we saying should they be abstinent? Not exactly. But what we're saying is it's really important to be aware of what's out there so you can be as safe as possible, again, until you begin to take those small positive steps. So we have heroin here on the left. You see it compared to the size of a dime, and that's a lethal size dose of heroin. In the middle, we have fentanyl. That's a lethal size dose of fentanyl. And then we have carfentanil, which is an elephant tranquilizer. And you can see the lethal dose of that compared to the dime. It's basically 1 to 2 grains of salt. That size can kill you if you take it into your body. A lot of times at places like this, I hand out the little packets of salt, and I ask you to put 1 or 2 grains in your hand so you can see exactly how small that is. But we do have reports of that. The latest reports that I saw were in Surry County. I do work with Surry County, which is just on the other side of the Virginia border. Mayberry, hometown USA. And they've got a fentanyl problem. They've got an overdose problem. We have one of the highest overdose rates in the state. But their faith community has been working now for the last, 6 months to come up with a plan on how the faith community is going to address the issue. And we've made great strides in that county. I'm very proud of that. You hear of fentanyl in the news, and there's a lot of myths out there, but this is what I'm going to tell you without getting into great detail. If you touch powdered fentanyl, you're not going to overdose. Powdered fentanyl, which is what we mainly see on the street, has a very difficult time getting through your skin. It's like the old stories about HIV, that if you sat on a toilet seat and somebody else had sat on a toilet seat that had HIV, you could get it. There has to be a portal of entry to the body. So if you were to breathe in fentanyl, it gets in through your mucous membranes, right? If you were to get it into your eyes, there's mucous membranes. But just to touch it, you're not going to overdose. Now, if you touch a fentanyl pain patch, you're going to overdose. Okay, there's a difference. But those pain patches have been specially formulated by scientists in a lab to be able to be transdermally absorbed. So don't worry about touching the cart handle at Walmart. We hear that a lot because you don't have to worry about that. I know this because a buddy of mine, his name is Chad, he runs MoSafe in St. Louis, Missouri, which is a combination harm reduction and abstinence-based recovery program. He also was a former prosecutor who lost his license to practice law because of his heroin addiction. So several months ago, he filmed a video with a doctor of pharmacology where he took a bag of heroin that had fentanyl in it, and he tested it to make sure that it had fentanyl in it, and then he poured the heroin in his hand and proceeded to hold it for about 10 minutes while he filmed this video to prove that he wasn't going to overdose. So don't believe everything you hear about that. I just want to put that out there. You hear sometimes about individuals, law enforcement, first responders who may have overdosed, or they say they've overdosed in the field. That hits the news media. But what we know is that in the United States, there's not a single confirmed occupational overdose from a first responder from fentanyl exposure. The signs and symptoms that they have that are reported in the media are due to anxiety and panic attacks. And later that's proven, but those stories are very small and usually printed as a correction or an addition to the big main story that says somebody overdosed when they found drugs in a car. So, we can talk about fentanyl later during question and answer if you have questions. You go to the next one. Sorry. Okay. All right, let's talk about who's at highest risk of an overdose. This is where y'all shout out to me. Who's at highest risk of an overdose?
Relapse. People who are in relapse.
Okay. People who've reinitiated use. Who else? Children, possibly. People who are at highest risk are people coming out of incarceration, So people who've recently left the gated community, I like that term because it's a lot less stigmatizing. And yeah, so that, and then people who have just come out of detox because their tolerance level drops. If you'll go ahead, you can just kind of hit the space bar and it'll come through. Just keep going. Yep, just keep going. Injection drug users, because the drugs go through your blood system and get into your body a lot faster. Mixing drugs with alcohol or other drugs, we call that polysubstance abuse. People who have a history of overdose, co-occurring mental health issues, heavy drug use. Oops, sorry about that, that's okay. One more, there we go. Heavy drug use over a short period of time. So I don't use every day, but I binge on the weekends or when I get my paycheck. People who use drugs alone, people who are isolated, people who have lack of education about the risks of drug abuse. We'll talk about the last two. People who use drugs alone. A lady named Danielle, and I talk about Danielle a lot. We worked with Danielle for about 4 years through our syringe exchange program, and she had periods of where she would be abstinent and then she would reinitiate use. But she always held a house that she allowed people to come in and use drugs. And she made sure that folks were as safe as possible. She always made sure that people had clean injection supplies, that they had plenty of Narcan in case someone were to overdose. They weren't looking to overdose, so let me dispel the myth about Narcan parties right now. People don't look to overdose. But we know, unfortunately, that people do overdose, so she wanted to make sure that nobody died on her watch. She did this for a number of years, and her landlord found out about it, and so she and about 12 people got evicted, and they scattered throughout the town of Hickory. She ended up in a hotel, sharing a room with some other folks, and we continued to meet her at the hotel when she requested it. She finally thought that she was going to get herself together. Her words, not mine. And so she moved back home with her grandmother because her mother had died from an overdose. She moved back home with her grandmother and her 3-year-old daughter that she'd lost custody of because of her drug use. And she was going through a stressful period and she reinitiated use, but she couldn't tell her grandma. She couldn't tell anybody because she was ashamed. Now, this is a woman who saved, I know for a fact she saved at least 20 lives, 20 other drug users by reversing them with Narcan. Making sure that her community was as safe as possible, given what they were doing. But she couldn't tell anybody that she had reinitiated use because of the stigma. So she went out in the woods behind her grandmother's house. And her obituary reads that she committed suicide. But she overdosed because she was using alone. And she didn't have anybody to call. She didn't have anybody to tell. And the stigma was too great at that point to reach out to family or to reach out to her community of faith. And so she left her 3-year-old daughter, much like her mother had left her. We now have a practice at Olive Branch that we tell people, if you're going to use alone, call us. 24/7, we have an on-call number. Somebody answers the phone no matter what. And we say, don't use alone. But if you're alone, call us. Tell us where you are. We won't come to you unless you're non-responsive on the phone. And we will sit on the phone with you to make sure that we can hear you breathe. Again, we're not saying that use drugs, and we're not saying drug use is okay. But what we are saying is that we want you to be safer. There's no safe drug use. But be safer, reduce the risk of harm. And if you're not responsive, we have your permission to call 911, or we'll come on scene if we're close enough and administer Narcan ourselves. So we tell people don't use alone because of Danielle. Okay, I'm going to go through this part. This is about what can bodies of faith do to reach out and use harm reduction as a ministry. What does love look like? It has the hands to help others. It has the feet to hasten to the poor and needy. It has the eyes to see misery and want, and has ears to hear the sighs and sorrows of men. That is what love looks like. It's a quote by St. Augustine. That table, and you can go ahead and put it to the next one, but this table up here actually has condoms, and there were some safer injection supplies there. That picture that says talk is cheap, go do love, was actually taken at an olive branch table that we tabled at the largest atheist conference in the Southeast. It was held in Hickory about 3 years ago. And you better believe we were the only ministry that was on site. Just so happens that one of my very good friends was the president of the local humanist society, and he invited us to come and table. He said, if nothing else, they'll be so shocked that they won't know what to say. Well, they knew what to say at first when we got there, and accused us of trying to evangelize, and we hadn't said a word. We were still setting up our table. But because they saw ministry on the sign, they were a little freaked out. By the end of the evening of the following day, because we were there for 2 days, we actually had taken in more donations than we ever had at any other conference or setting of that sort. They were willing to help support this ministry. Now we're talking atheists and humanists from all over the world. Literally, we had guys from New Zealand, Australia, Alaska, Europe, everywhere, who come in for this. But they realized that we weren't there to push a faith down their throat. We were there to help them stay safer and to simply to educate them on what harm reduction was. Because nobody from our community, from the faith community, was talking to them. And I'm still in touch with some of those folks. And it's been several years. It was a great opportunity. We thought outside the box. We took a risk, and it benefited us. If for no other reason, we got to share the gospel of harm reduction with a lot of folks who are so turned off by the gospel that normally wouldn't have had a conversation with us in the grocery store about the price of green beans. Think outside the box when you're thinking about doing ministry when it comes to harm reduction. So, let's go back up. So let's talk about what can your church do. In harm reduction, we talk about we meet people where they are. And I hear that all the time in my harm reduction side of life. But then I also hear harm reductionists say, but we don't want to meet the church where they are because they just want this and they just want that. And I ask them who are the theys, and they don't really know because they don't interact with people of faith that much, these particular individuals. So I said, I'm a person of faith, but I'm also a harm reductionist. How do I make this bridge? So I came up with the idea, this is like totally genius, that harm reductionists should meet the church where they are. And we shouldn't make all these wild, crazy, liberal, progressive, radical, whatever demands on the church if the church isn't ready for that. Because guess what? We don't do that with the people who use drugs. We don't do that with people who use substances. We say we're going to meet you where you are, and we're going to stay with you on the journey, and we're not going to judge you. What a novel concept. Can we apply that to the church? So I've made that my mission to do that. So if you have a church that's maybe not ready to embrace harm reduction, like radical, like have drug users meeting in your fellowship hall on Wednesday night after Bible study to figure out how they're going to overthrow the government, and make drug policies that are great that help support people who use drugs, and that does happen, actually, at a church in Greensboro. But if you're not there yet, and that's okay, because I'm not asking you to be there, maybe your church is willing to do a medication take-back. Anybody heard of medication take-back? You may have drop boxes in your local police department or a pharmacy or public health where you can go and take unused medication. Well, there's also officers that are certified by the DEA to come to different locations and do take-backs. So maybe you want to have a medication take-back Sunday, and you want to talk about why it's important to get those prescription pills out of your house. If you have teenagers and someone uses your bathroom as a teenager, don't be surprised if someone's not going through your medicine cabinet to see what you have. And that's not to scare you, that's reality, folks. That just happens, okay? Maybe you have an older congregation and they have a lot of pills and they don't know what to do with them. They're not taking them anymore. Medication take back is a great thing to do. And maybe that's where you are and you'd be comfortable with that. You can do bulletin inserts to talk about the opioid issue and why it's important to get unused medication off the street. Medication disposal bags back there. Maybe you want to have some of those on hand and talk about that. And if that's where you are, then we're good with that. Next slide, please. Maybe you want to hold in the Naloxone 101 like we've had today in harm reduction class and talk about overdose, have an overdose awareness event. Maybe you want to ask folks to put together naloxone kits and go one step beyond that, and you'll find this in your folder. There is a blessing of the naloxone ceremony. So maybe you have a group of folks that are going to come together and they're going to get naloxone and they want to bring it to your church, or maybe invite you as a faith leader to come in and bless their naloxone before they put it out in the street. Every bit of the supplies that we put out in the street, no matter what it is, goes through blessing. We bless everything. So these nice little crochet bags are made for us by the ladies at First Presbyterian in Gastonia. And they have, you can't see it in this picture, but this gray thread that drawstrings them up is a reflective thread. And we have those made because we put naloxone in them, which is on the left-hand side, and syringe exchange stuff, which is here. And then we have a homeless ministry, so sometimes we'll put a fruit cup or a packet of Propel or a bottle of water and a pack of crackers in these bags. And they don't want to meet people who use drugs, and have been very vocal about that. I'm not interested in that. I'm not comfortable with that. But guess what I'll do? I will help you get the word out and get your supplies out, and we will make these. The reflective thread is for people who live in houses with no electricity, or who live on the street or live in the woods, who need access to their supplies very quickly, mainly the Narcan. And if they have a cell phone or they have the natural moonlight, it picks up that reflective thread and they can find it in case of an emergency. Next slide, please. Maybe you want to do a supply drive. We take up supplies for the homeless, right? We make the little blessing bags for homeless folks. Or we gather school supplies for kids that may need school supplies that can't afford them. Why not wound care kits? Gauze, antibiotic ointment, alcohol swabs, plastic gloves, Band-Aids, Q-tips, things of that nature. You're already doing harm reduction in your community. You're just hitting a different population if you take it to this step. Next. Maybe you have a church van. This is what we're working on in Surrey County, in Mayberry. We had an issue with transportation because it's very rural population, very rural communities. People have to walk miles to be able to get to a treatment provider. So we're coordinating church vans and personal vehicles and volunteers from the churches to be willing to pick up people to take them to medication-assisted recovery, to take them to a doctor's appointment, to take them to therapy, to take them to rehab. The churches knew that there was an issue. They didn't know what to do. But they knew that they had vehicles that were sitting unused Monday through Saturday. So they said, let's do this. Let's get together. Now, one of the things we say is, if you're going to do this piece, and really with any of the work that you do, don't ask for a theological commitment from the people that you're serving. You're there to address their physical needs. The spiritual conversations will come with relationship, but be willing to address the physical needs first. Let God begin to work on them and have that conversation with them first. Next slide, please. Syringe exchange. It promotes the building of trusting relationships with people who use drugs. And I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail except to say the Center for Disease Control has done studies, and according to them, people who participate in syringe exchanges are 5 times more likely to enter into a recovery state because of the relationship that they build, and they trust people because we see them on a weekly basis or every other week basis. And so when we begin to talk about what goals they have for their life, what they've decided they want to do, and we make recommendations at their request, they trust us. So these are 2 individuals. Ashley standing over here, former everything pretty much user. She'll tell you that. She identifies as a person who has retired from drug use. She is working on her master's. She's a former school teacher. She works as a peer support specialist for Watauga County in their overdose response team, and she volunteers with us to do syringe exchange in the Boone Blowing Rock area. She came to abstinence-based recovery through harm reduction. This is my buddy Patty. She works for us. She does our jail-based education. She is a convicted felon, has served many years in the gated community, and she now, like I said, does our jail-based education, which we call Points of Hope, which is halting overdose through prevention education.